everyone, you're very welcome along here this afternoon to the Crawford Art Gallery. We're going to be discussing over the next 50 minutes or so the connection between gut health and mental health and the connections between all of them. We've got a fantastic panel of experts here this afternoon with Professor Ted Dinan. He's a pioneer in investigating the impact of probiotics on mental health. He's a trailblazer on the connection between gut and brain, everything from depression to IBS to stress. So we'll be definitely picking Ted's brain over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. We've Dr. Onthatile. She's a clinical research doctor at the Atlantia Health Centre for Global Research in Ireland. She's worked in South Africa as well, so she'll be very insightful on some of the studies that Atlantia have carried out. And we have nutritional therapist Dr. Anneliese as well, who's with her from the Health Hub in Ballincollig. So we'll be asking Anneliese some questions over the course of the next little while. Professor Dinan, we'll start with you. We're just wondering, could you break it down into simple terms for us, the connection between gut health, I suppose, and mental health, and why we're here today?
Right, well, until, I suppose, 10 or 15 years ago, people largely ignored the role that gut microbes play in relation to mental health. I remember, certainly as a medical student, we were taught that microbes within the gut were largely commensal, which meant that they didn't do us any harm and we fed them, and that was about their importance, really. But over the last 15 years or so, it's become clear that microbes in the gut play a very fundamental role in relation to our mental health. And we have, as adults, we have about 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos of bacteria in our intestine. There are over 1,000 different strains of bacteria. Now, in weight terms, that's the same weight as the human brain. So the adult brain is about the same weight as the weight of the bacteria in your intestine. And it's clear that those bacteria play a very fundamental role in producing lots of different molecules that our brains require. And of course, what determines the bacteria in our gut, there are many different factors which we can discuss later on, but of course, one of the dominant factors is our diet or our nutrition. The microbiome or microbiota refers to the entire collection of microbes in the gut. I've mentioned bacteria because in weight terms, they're the dominant microbes within the gut, the bacteria. But there are viruses in the intestine, massively more viruses than bacteria, but they don't obviously weigh as much. There are fungi. So there are a raft. I suppose in terms of what we know more about bacteria now in the intestine than we do about the other microbes, but they all play an important role because they are, I suppose, they're almost like an organism. I mean, I think when you look at the microbiota, what you're talking about essentially is an organism, an organ. It's a bit like the liver is an organ in our bodies. The microbiota is an organ within an organ, and it's obviously within the intestine.
Do you find that people get overwhelmed when you start using terms like microbiome?
I think the simple way to look at it is you have a vast array of microbes in your intestine, and there are many ways you can positively influence those, particularly diet. Now, there are ways you can negatively impact them as well. For instance, a lot of medications negatively impact microbes, even though they may be necessary, but they do negatively impact. But undoubtedly, nutrition is the most important influence. When babies are breastfed, they have the optimal gut microbiota for a baby. As adults, we want to grow old in a healthy way, and we know that as adults that having a diverse range of microbes in your gut is really essential to maintain health. And of course, we all want to grow old healthily. Nobody wants to be frail. And there's overwhelming evidence, actually much of it, the original evidence actually comes here from UCC, showing that if people lose diversity in their gut microbiota, that frailty follows rapidly. So as adults, not as children, but as adults, we want to maintain diversity. And as I've stressed already, nutrition is an important factor there, although there are other factors like exercise as well.
Anneliese, you've got a very practical experience working in the Health Hub in Ballincollig as a nutritional therapist. So we want to know, how do we improve this? You've got the practical advice on this.
Yeah, so as Ted was saying, it really is hugely about diet. We have to feed the bacteria in our gut, and we have to feed it the right food. We have to create an environment in our gut where they can thrive as well, so that the right types of bacteria can populate. So really, fibre is the key in most of our diets, and I think there's lots of research that shows people in a wheat and high fibre diet, for example, in rural Africa, they have a huge diversity of bacteria in their gut compared to us on Western diet. So there'd be certain foods, of course, that would affect diversity, and that would be saturated fats, sugars, of course. Alcohol is a big one too, except for glass red wine. So there's plant chemicals called polyphenols in red wine that actually are very beneficial for our gut bacteria. These polyphenols we'll find as well in fruits and vegetables. And these are wonderful to create a healthy environment so our good gut bacteria can thrive. So it's all about a high fibre diet, and also a huge diversity of the type of food that we eat. So I think, I actually didn't fact check it, but I think when I was doing a bit of research for this, we've become very dependent on about 12 different types of foods in the Western diet. There's a huge over-dependence. And if you think about what we eat, really, we do eat probably a lot of meat from the same animals, so eggs and chickens and cows. We probably eat the same grain a lot of other people, wheat than any other grain. Even in terms of vegetables, I think probably most people might eat maybe carrots and peas and possibly parsnips and potatoes. So we actually don't have that huge rainbow and diversity of food in our diet that would be really important to reflect the diversity of bacteria that we want in our gut. So the best diet, really, I suppose, if people were asking you for advice, is what diet should you follow? And it's the Mediterranean diet. Time and time again in studies, this diet has been shown to be post-heart healthy, brain healthy. And the main reason being is that it's very high in whole foods. So the foods they haven't been processed. Like if you process wheat or other grains, you lose about 80% of the fibre and the nutrition. So you don't have fibre to feed your gut bacteria, and you're also missing your B vitamins for your grain and food as well. So it would be whole grains. They eat a lot of pulses like lentils, peas and beans, nuts. They eat a huge amount of vegetables, and they eat a lot of fish, like oily fish. Red meat only 3 times a week. So red meat can increase your risk of colon cancer as well. So I think just a simple way of putting it into place is take a look at your plate. 50% of your plate should be vegetables or fruit if it's for breakfast. 25% should be some kind of whole grain. And then the other 25% should be your protein, which could be eggs or pulses or cheese or meat or fish. And that's really probably the simplest way is to just explain it in those terms. But all those foods will contain the fibres and the polyphenols that will feed your healthy gut. And we could probably have a chat about fermented foods then in a while, I think, when we talk about superfoods. The lovely thing about eating healthy is it's not just good for one thing, so it prevents everything. So if you've that type of a diet, the Mediterranean diet, you're also preventing cognitive decline in older age. You're also supporting healthy bones, so preventing osteoporosis. You're also supporting good heart health. So it's like the gut will feed into all of those via different pathways as well. But a healthy diet like that, and we can achieve it with the food that we have here in Ireland. It doesn't have to be Mediterranean style where we're sitting out and under blue skies and having, our lovely glass of red wine with our lunch. We can do it in Ireland. We have wonderful food here. So you don't need to be buying very expensive superfoods, broccoli and cabbages and scallions and tomatoes and lettuces, peppers. Like we have access to a whole rainbow of foods now all year round. And that's it really. I think the biggest takeaway I think would be just try and get your veg up and your fibre up, and that will improve your diet regardless.
Dr. Onthatile, you run these studies for Atlantia. What kind of studies are they carrying out at the moment into gut health and the benefits of how we eat and our microbiome?
So we have quite a variety of studies that we're currently undertaking. We have studies on fiber products. We have studies on actual probiotics and different strains and different studies. So we also do studies that focus on safety and tolerability of these products, so make sure that they can be taken by you guys and they don't harm you in any way. And we also do efficacy studies, which is how good are they and how well do they work, and then which dose. So we have quite a variety of studies, and this is just to name a few. So we have disease-specific trials, trials that look at pre-diabetes, trials that are looking at obesity, trials that are looking at people that are affected with stress, people that are affected with low mood. And all of these trials would use natural products like probiotics, where we're trying to see the effect of these natural supplements and probiotics, fiber supplements, and even starches. We have now an allulose trial, which is a kind of carbohydrate sugar type of product. And we're also ranging into a different field where we're looking at the vaginal microbe, which is not the topic of discussion today. So we do quite a variety of trials, and there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of benefit for participants when they do come to our site at Atlantia.
What kind of time frame are the trials? Does it depend on what they're looking to achieve, and how many people do you kind of need to take part?
Yeah, they vary in length, so it would depend on the type of protocol that we have and what we're trying to achieve and the product that we do have. So as you can imagine, some things would take a while to have an effect in the body, and this is why the trial will run longer, for over 6 months before we can stop it, or even longer. But we have trials as short as 7 days, to trials running to 6+ months. We have a stress and cognition trial in the elderly. I think our lowest, the age range there would be like 55 to 85 years of age. And that is running about 6 months on cognition, and it's a turmeric product. So there's a lot of different lengths, and it does depend on what we're trying to achieve and the population that we're trialing this out in.
Thanks so much, Doctor. Professor Dinan, you've done a lot of research into, I suppose, the gut and mental health and stress. How are they connected?
Well, the gut and the brain are connected in a variety of ways. There's a nerve, the vagus nerve, which is quite a long meandering nerve that actually connects the brain and most internal organs, including the gut. And we've shown that certain bacteria can only communicate with the brain when the vagus nerve is intact. In other words, if the vagus nerve was cut, those microbes couldn't communicate with the brain. You've heard about fiber and the importance of fiber. And one of the important factors about fiber is that fiber, when it is metabolized by certain microbes, produces short-chain fatty acids. Now, we're not capable of producing short-chain fatty acids, so we need the bacteria acting on the fiber to produce short-chain fatty acids. Now, examples of short-chain fatty acids would be butyrate and propionate and acetate, and they can get into the bloodstream and they can travel through the bloodstream to the brain, and they actually can regulate the way in which genes in the brain actually function. So certain genes in the brain are regulated by these short-chain fatty acids. Another important route of communication, and one that most of you will probably have heard of serotonin, because it's a transmitter that's associated with mood and with dysregulation of mood in depression. And the building block of serotonin is the amino acid tryptophan. And it must be 12 or 14 years ago now, one of my PhD students at the time showed that certain microbes could significantly increase the levels of tryptophan in the blood. Now you might say, well, why would that be important? Well, it's important because as humans, we have virtually no storage capacity for tryptophan in our brain. Obviously, serotonin is important, but we need a constant supply of tryptophan crossing the blood-brain barrier in order to maintain normal serotonin transmission. And certain microbes, the microbe we were looking at the time was a bifidobacteria, is capable of synthesizing tryptophan. So there are some of the ways in which microbes can influence the brain. Of course, the other way in which microbes can influence the brain is we're all prone to stress, and stress can be a good thing, and in moderation it's a good thing, but of course if it's excessive, as we all know, it's anything but good. And the structure or the mechanism by which we deal with chronic stress is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, but it's essentially the production of cortisol, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. Cortisol is the main stress hormone in man. And we know that gut microbes regulate the levels of cortisol. So in other words, if you have a gut microbiota that's less than optimal, your capacity to deal with stress will be less than optimal. You know, if any of us are stressed, our cortisol level goes up, and that's normal, but it should come back down again. Unfortunately, in some people, whether they're depression being an example, but even when people aren't depressed, cortisol levels can go up and be sustained at a very high level over an extended period of time. Now, that is not good for one's physical or mental well-being. It just isn't. And we know that one of the really key regulators of that is actually the gut microbiota. So gut microbes are capable of regulating the release of cortisol. So there are many ways in which gut microbes, I haven't mentioned all of them, I've just mentioned some, but so there are a number of ways in which gut microbes can regulate our capacity to deal with stress and therefore our mental health.
I suppose that the next question from this, and Anneliese, you might be able to answer this from working in the Hub and Ballincollig, and you provide clinics as well, is how do we get those microbiomes under control that we can help our stress levels and that cortisol levels?
To go back to the diet again, that we've spoken about really is the faculty principle, because if you can create a healthy environment where they thrive, you will maintain that health. But there are a lot of supplements actually that can help as well. I think, you have to really start with the bigger picture in mind. So you put the food in, but then how do you break it down and how do you digest that food is very important, especially in modern life where we're eating on the run, so we're not chewing our food properly. We are eating when we're stressed, so our digestive juices aren't really working the way that they should be. So it starts there. If you're not digesting your food and it's reaching into your digestive tract undigested, it will favour the production of different types of bacteria. For example, the Bacteroid species now with ribor on a lot of wheat and undigested protein would be preferential from them. So digestion is really important. So I'd often recommend a digestive enzyme to my customers, particularly as well if they're on something like a PPI, because those PPIs are for reflux, for people who get acid reflux and heartburn. And they would hugely affect the digestion because they affect the levels of stomach acid, which is needed to kickstart the whole process of digestion. So that would be one thing I could recommend. Probiotics, of course, are a big one, and I think things have changed hugely in the last 10 years, same with Ted, with the resurgent one microbiome. Now, doctors are commonly recommending probiotic after an antibiotic, for example. So I have people looking for various different types of probiotics, and my advice really is that if you do want to take one long term, I would definitely choose different types, because not only are they all different strains of bacteria, but even the different strains from different companies and different genetic makeups. So it's like planting seeds in your garden. If you just keep planting the same seeds, you're just going to get the same flowers. So you want that huge diversity. So if you do feel like taking a probiotic for mood, which I can highly recommend, definitely trying a few different ones. I think, Ted, you probably know a little bit more on this, but their granulosis is probably a big one for mood as well, isn't it?
So what I would say in relation to probiotics is, there are lots of things out there being sold as probiotics. Some of them aren't even alive. They're dead. I mean, they're so now again, I think there's a better scenario here in Europe. The regulation in the US is very, very lax, to put it mildly. And there are a lot of products on the US market that really are they're inert. They're not of any health benefit whatsoever. So I would suggest, I don't promote any product, I'm not going to mention any product, but I think that, it is important to kind of, bear the source of the product in mind when buying a probiotic. Because there are probiotics out there, and as I say, a probiotic is supposed to be a live bacteria, and some of these aren't even alive in the capsule, not of mind doing anything beneficial, which they clearly are not. So I think, buying from a reputable source is extremely important.
Dr. Onthatile, in your studies, how have you found these results have shown to people? Like, have they been very enlightening when they've come to the fore and released the findings, with the likes of what Dr. Dinan is saying?
Yes, we have had trials with positive findings, and most of these have already been published in a major scientific journal across Europe, not just in Ireland. And we have the benefit at Atlantia in that our medical director, Professor Ted Dinan, is actually leading pioneer in this field. So he's done a lot of research, and we've done a lot of research at Atlantia with him, where he's the principal investigator. So our trials have had a worldwide impact, because not only, as much as they're done in Cork in Ireland, a lot of our sponsors are international companies that are looking out to have, one, his expertise and the expertise of Atlantia, who's been running for more than 10 years now, to be able to conduct these trials properly and soundly in line with ethics guidelines. So our trials have had positive results and impact and have been published, and we continue to, we're writing papers for current studies that recently finished as well. So this will be in the papers soon enough.
Yeah, Professor Dinan, you spoke a lot there about probiotics, but prebiotics are also something that are very important as well. Can you explain the difference between them for us?
Certainly. I mean, probiotics are traditionally defined as live bacteria that have a positive health benefit. That may be a mental health benefit, it could be a benefit from many different health parameters. A prebiotic, on the other hand, is traditionally defined as a fiber which promotes the growth of good bacteria. So a fiber that, for instance, that increases the level of bifidobacteria in your intestine, we would regard that as a prebiotic. Now, the term prebiotic has expanded somewhat in recent years. It used to be exclusively referring to fibers that promote the growth of good bacteria. But we now know that there are other molecules out there that also promote the growth of good bacteria. We showed a few years ago that polyunsaturated fatty acids from fish, for example, you've heard, obviously, fish oils are good for our heart, they're good for our brains, but they actually promote the growth of good bacteria in our intestine as well. There are other prebiotics, but as I say, traditionally prebiotics are fibers that promote the growth of good bacteria, whereas probiotics are actually bacteria which are good from a health perspective.
Anneliese, we need to be very informed, I suppose, when we're making choices and we're buying products and we're going into shops, and they can be labelled in a certain way that may be misleading. So maybe you're buying a probiotic and it might, you might think that you're doing yourself a great job, and then you might read the ingredients and it could be loaded with sugar. Like, how knowledgeable do we have to be when we're making our choices around food and supplements?
Yeah, actually, it's a great point. It's very good. Food has become very confusing, and it's become less and less like food, really, I think. When I studied in college, it was all about a low-fat diet, and I think the damage that has done over the last 30 years is quite significant, because the low-fat products are loaded with lots of additives and sugars and things like that are really not beneficial for our good bacteria in our gut. And when we're looking at our gut, we're looking at fermented foods. But I don't know about you, I've taken a yogurt out of me that got lost at the back of my fridge, and I'm still eating it after 2 months. There's been no bacteria growth on it whatsoever. So you have to question what is actually in that product, and it can be very confusing. So I think if you can, it's very difficult to get raw product here in Ireland because of the rules and regulations around pasteurisation. But I think if you can get it as close to the natural product as possible, so try and go for a lime natural yogurt if you're buying. If you want to get the good bacteria, eat the food as close to its original look and food as possible. This is a challenge actually for people. I found that if you don't eat a lot of processed food, there's really 2 or 3 aisles at the supermarket that you walk down. You probably don't go near the other 12 aisles. So the next time you do your shop, maybe just take a look and see, can you keep your shopping to the 3 aisles, which would be probably your fruit and veg, and your meat and your dairy, and your yogurts and cheese, and then the bread aisle for your brown breads and your whole grains. And if you can do that, you're actually you're eating very healthily. The foods will be as close to their original source as possible. I'm going to have all of those, the fibres of the prebiotics and the fermented probiotics that you need to keep yourself and your gut healthy. And a lot of people as well, actually, Ciara would ask me about, buying kefir. You can spend a lot of money on these products. You can really make these quite easily in your own home. It's not difficult. All you need really is a glass jar, a starter culture, which is the kefir grains or the bacteria. You'll buy it in any health shop. And then you can make it with any choice of milk that you want. The easiest generally is probably cow's milk or goat's milk. And you don't have to have a clean kitchen. In fact, if your kitchen isn't perfectly clean, it's better. You'll get a better range of bacteria in your kefir. And you pour your milk on top of your grains, and maybe 2 days later, in a reasonably moderately warm kitchen, you'll have your kefir that you can have for your breakfast every morning. And that's cheap, easy to do, and I think once you get into the habit of it, you'll notice a big difference in your health.
Do you find that, you're saying that the kefir is affordable, it's easy to do. Is that a factor for people when making food choices around health? Sometimes it feels like the foods like the fruit and veggies, because they're maybe being imported, that it can be more expensive for people. It can be more of a challenge for them to make choices which will support better health.
Yeah, it definitely can. And actually, the other factor besides money is actually time. People are very time poor. So you have parents coming home after a hard day work trying to put a healthy food, a meal on the table. It's a lot of the time they can cook it from scratch. So those would be the biggest challenges. To be honest, if you eat whole foods, you actually spend less money on your groceries because you're not buying the expensive processed foods and ready-made meals and the more expensive yogurts. You're buying cheap and cheerful natural yogurt. So I think you can eat very cheaply and very healthily. And we've had when the diversity supermarkets now, Aldi and Lidl, they're fantastic, and they do a great range of hummus and lots of sort of quick snacks that you can give to kids. You have to make it, besides being affordable, you have to make it easy for people, and it has to be achievable. So very extensive recipes with 20 different ingredients, an Irish stew packed full of leeks and celery and carrots and potatoes with their skin on and a bit of lean lamb meat. It's just as healthy as a very expensive and complicated vegetarian tagine. So we can get good nutrition from whole food without it actually being too complicated or too expensive. And I think that's really the key, is to stick to simplicity.
Thank you so much, Anneliese. Dr. Onthatile, what's been the most incredible discovery that you have found during your time with Atlantia and the studies that you've made from the results?
Personally, I think it's more the effect of, probiotics on stress. Usually stress, we always emphasize lifestyle modification and just knowing how the gut-brain axis works, which is a lot of what trials that we do, and realizing that there's a lot that we can eat that can reduce our cognition, can reduce our stress, can reduce the inflammatory markers, and all of these are linked to adverse health outcomes in the body, be it cancer, be it hypertension, diabetes, even weight gain. So it's quite interesting, the kind of trials that we do and the kind of field that we do, just to see how we can connect natural products, be it fiber, probiotics, food supplements, into health outcomes, which is, I think, when back then in medical school, a lot of focus was on pharma and drugs, and now we're going back to how can we use natural products into treating ourselves and making it better. So we're working a lot with what is already available out there, which works well.
What is involved if people want to take part in a study? What happens over the course of it?
Okay, so first you need to sign up. And then once you do sign up and come to Atlantia, first of all, we need to know if you're eligible for a trial. Which trial are you eligible for? So we have multiple trials, different age ranges, different products. So and then we screen you. We have to make sure that you are healthy and safe enough to be included in the trial. One thing that I love about Atlantia and the regulations that we have in Ireland is that we always put the participant first. So the first thing is to first ensure your safety before you join in a trial. And then when you do come to our site, we will give you an informed consent leaflet, which will explain everything that the trial is about. But most importantly, we'll also sit with you and go through this document to make sure that you're fully aware of what you're signing up for. And at any stage where you feel uncomfortable or where you feel like this is not for you, you're allowed to leave. So it's voluntary participation, which is what you emphasize. And once you're safe, and once you're willing, and once you've signed the ICF, then you can go on to the trial. What is lovely is that you get a health check. So we can do vitals, depending on the trial. We can do blood results. We frequently do physical exams as well. And this is still to ensure your safety and to also understand your baseline, like what is your normal, because no two people are the same. And then once we've eliminated all that, you're eligible for the trial, you have the right conditions, the right age, the right BMI, you go into the trial, we follow up regularly, we call or send text messages where you let us know how's the product treating you, how you're feeling, and we reaffirm that you still want to continue to the trial and remind you of your rights, that at any time you can withdraw your consent. And then most of our participants complete the trial safely, and we do another health check, vitals, bloods to make sure everything's okay. But in the meantime, we're collecting data, be it questionnaires, be it stool samples, saliva samples, checking for your cortisol levels, and some tests that we put you through, be it cognition tests, stress tests, whatever the case may be, until the end of the trial. And then once everybody's completed, the results are compiled, and we usually have a blurb on our website or we publish in a journal.
Do participants get something out of it personally? Like, would they often find something out about themselves that they didn't previously know and that could be beneficial to them in the long term?
I think they do. I think just to become more aware, we always communicate back any safety results that we have with you. So we'll let you know this is what your vital readings, and because we collect a couple, you can always see the trend over time, which is always more meaningful for us as doctors, not just to see one time point, but to see the trend, like is your BP staying the same level, or is it going up, or is it improving while you're on the study? Same thing applies for any bloods that we may take during the trial that we do for you. So yeah, that's just one of the things.
Actually, I think every member of my family have been doing the trial at the beginning. And my dad, my 82-year-old dad, was so determined to get on one once, because I think there might have been a gym membership. There was something going with it anyway. And he had to be a certain weight. He filled his pants pockets up with his collection of 2-euro coins so that he could make the weight to get on the trial. But I think these are much sought after spaces on the trial.
One thing I forgot is we remunerate you for your time. So you will get compensation, travel, and the time that you spend taken away from work or your family, you will be compensated in line with the Irish standards. So yeah, your time will be returned to you monetarily.
So if you want to fill up your pockets with 2
euros, so don't bring the 2 euros, we'll give them to you.
Professor Dinan, you are an absolute pioneer in this field. What do you envision for the future of discoveries around gut health? What would you like to see happen? What do you think is going to happen in the near future?
Well, what I would like to see happen over the next few years is I would like to see a probiotic or a psychobiotic, as I call them, that reaches the threshold where you can clearly say that they're as effective as an antidepressant. And, I'm a psychiatrist, so obviously the patients I tend to see, tend to have quite severe forms of depression. But, when you look in primary care and general practice in Ireland, there are lots of patients who present either with depression or anxiety disorders. It's one of the most common conditions seen in primary care. And understandably, a lot of patients who have mild forms of depression are rather reluctant to go on antidepressants. I think if somebody has, I'm not averse to antidepressants at all. I think they can be exceedingly beneficial. But it's a reality that many patients with milder forms of depression are reluctant to take antidepressants. Of course, cognitive behavior therapy, which is a psychological therapy used to treat depression, isn't always as readily available as it might be. And if you're going to go privately, it can be quite expensive. So I do think that there is increasing evidence that certain strains of probiotic actually are effective in helping people who have high stress levels. But I would like to see something on the market that had every bit as good a data set as an antidepressant. I mean, clearly, in order to get an antidepressant onto the European market, you've got to do very big-scale clinical trials. And I think that one of the problems in this area, and it's a problem that I didn't really appreciate, when Atlantia was set up, is that, for a variety of reasons, the food companies may not be in a position or may not wish to do the big scale trials that big pharma would have done for antidepressants. Now, there are many reasons for that. I think some of the reasons emanate from the US, where frankly the regulation is very lax and you can make all sorts of claims for all sorts of products without having data at all. And of course, a lot of the big pharmas in particular are focused on America. They're interested in the big American market. And if you can make a claim that your probiotic is the best thing for treating depressions and whatever, why do a big study if you can get away with a bit of a con job? And so I think that what I would like to see, and I do think we're getting there, we're not there yet, I would like to see people with milder forms of depression have the option of taking a truly effective probiotic, because I think many people would be happy to take something that was natural and that was free of side effects, rather than taking an antidepressant if they had mild forms of depression. And I'm not knocking antidepressants. Heck, look, I've written thousands and thousands of prescriptions for antidepressants over the years, and when appropriately prescribed, they can have a life-saving effect. But I do think that for milder forms, it would be great to have probiotics out there that were truly as effective as antidepressants.
I suppose one of the focus of Atlantia is about natural solutions for health and disease prevention. A lot of treatments that people are getting is in reaction to something that's happening. But this is about getting to the point where you don't have to go down something to sort it. You're already tackling it straight on. It's part of your lifestyle. Dr. Onthatile might have to answer that for us.
Yes, I think it's a good alternative, and one might think we work against diets and everything, and we don't. We actually work along with them, because there's some people who, for whatever health reason, may not be able to take a Mediterranean diet. And this is where the trials we do become beneficial, because we're doing trials on the isolated product or the isolated nutrient and what benefits can it give you. So if you can't, for example, absorb a certain nutrient in foods, you can't eat tomatoes, but you want the nutrients that it's available, these are the trials that we're doing. And now you can get a capsule of turmeric or a capsule of garlic or a capsule for fiber that may be better absorbed than the natural products, which you may not be able to eat for whatever reasons, or you may not be able to afford to. Or, you're 20-year-old, you're busy, you don't have time to cook, so you want to pop all your multivitamins as opposed to eat a healthy Mediterranean diet. So our research helps that group as well, Or those who want to boost, you want to eat the healthy diet, but you also want to improve, make sure you're getting the right probiotics, the right prebiotics to supplement this diet. So we really work along with natural stuff, and that's what I love about what we do.
And I kind of see the same thing really, is that you need certain levels of certain nutrients to have a therapeutic effect. So good diet, you can't replace good diet, and of course exercise and sleep plays a part in the gut bacteria as well. But even just, for something like arthritis, you're never going to take enough turmeric as an anti-inflammatory to kind of get the swelling down. So you can use all of these natural remedies therapeutically to achieve something, and that's why it's so interesting to have this research going on probiotics and depression, because it's becoming such a modern health problem now, and especially for our young people growing up, we're seeing a lot of it as well. So if we have natural ways of treating it, it would be it's just far beneficial from a therapeutic perspective.
And Anneliese, you've come across this a lot, because people will come into you with their blood tests, and it's a very individual thing, isn't it? It's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely, it's a very I see all sorts of different types of reasons why people are unwell when they come into the shop. But I have to say, the gut is nearly always the starting point with about 90% of people, be it mental health, be it IBS, be it migraines, be it autoimmune disorder. So we'll often start with the gut, and it's incredible how quickly you can get a good result. Within 2 to 3 months, you can reverse 10 years of bad eating. People can feel better, they can feel less bloated, more energy, mentally more sharp, more positive, more motivated. by using diet and natural supplements, but in a very focused way to kind of achieve certain things.
Professor Dinan, what's your current focus? What is your goal at the moment?
Well, I suppose it is really very much along the kind of the use of probiotics for treating areas of mental health like depression. I'd like to take up one point. There's been a lot of mention of the Mediterranean diet here today. And the first studies suggesting that people in the Mediterranean region had less depression than those of us in Northern Europe. Those studies were published over 30 years ago, so they're not exactly new studies. And a lot of those studies were dismissed on the grounds that, of course, they have lots of sunshine down in the Mediterranean region, you have lots of rain in Ireland, so of course they're happier and they're less depressed than we are. But the reality is that if you look at people in Northern Europe, here in Ireland, who are on a Mediterranean type diet, the levels of depression are similar to those in the Mediterranean region. So this is not just exposure to sunshine, which I think is wonderful for one's health in general, but I do think that the Mediterranean diet, and I fully concur with the point that it doesn't have to cost a fortune. I was lecturing there about 2 or 3 years ago in London. I think it was in the Royal Society of Medicine, and it was to a medical audience, and one of the GPs stood up, and she was a GP who was working in Hackney, and I know Hackney well because I've actually worked there previously. And she stood up and she said, my patients can't afford what you're talking about. And I don't believe that for a second, because, just as, let's say, mackerel in Ireland has generally been a relatively available and a cheap source of fish, and probably has the highest level of polyunsaturated fatty acids of any fish in Ireland. Cabbage is relatively cheap, carrots are cheap. There are lots of vegetables and fruits that are grown here in Ireland that are cheap. I think the problem we've got isn't one of money, although I do think that money can be a factor for some people. It's education. There is a problem in people eating too many processed foods and thinking that highly processed foods are in some way good for them, which clearly they are not. Whereas I think, there should be a greater emphasis at a school level, in my opinion. I think it needs to start in school, preferably even in primary school, encouraging children to eat a healthier diet. Now, I'm not suggesting, gee whiz, I remember when my kids were in primary school, trying to get them to eat fish was a bit of an uphill struggle, to put it mildly. But at the same time, I do think that kids could be taught much more about healthy diets at a much earlier stage. And if they were, I think we wouldn't have as many, health problems in our society as we do. But really, to reiterate the point, a Mediterranean diet is highly effective. There's no doubt in preventing a lot of things, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune. You do not have to buy fruit and vegetables from the Mediterranean region to be on a Mediterranean type diet.
Thanks so much, Professor. Has anybody any questions before we wrap up?
Quick question. So, Professor, do you believe that natural fermentation can be achieved at home? And has any research been made on things like sauerkraut or beetroot or any of these vegetables? And what is the actual benefit of them?
I think the benefit is enormous, and I think that they can be produced at home. Paul Cotter, who is a colleague of mine in UCC, he actually went and looked at fermented foods around the world, and in various parts of Africa you see wonderful fermented foods that have very high levels of lactobacilli and so forth. I agree entirely. I think a lot of these things like sauerkraut can be produced at home, costing very, very little indeed. I suppose one of the good things is that, I remember when I was a kid, the only fermented food you could get in the supermarket really was yogurt. There really wasn't anything else. Whereas now, if you don't want to do it at home, but I would encourage people to do it at home, you can get kefir and kombucha and sauerkraut and kimchi and so forth in supermarkets. So it's great to see a greater diversity, but I agree with you entirely. A lot of these substances can be produced probably to a much higher standard in the home situation.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Professor, I was wondering if you had a picture of psychobiotic and some LSD.
You know, we've actually, we had a paper in one of the journals on that very topic recently. You know, there's an awful lot written recently about psychedelic drugs, and it clearly is potentially a major market. Now, there are a few facts which I think are ignored in relation to psychedelics. One is a lot of the money for psychedelic drug exploration is coming from Silicon Valley and from very rich dudes who have made a lot of money out of tech and think they're going to make a lot of money out of drugs, psychedelic drugs as well. And the second thing, and this is something I feel very, very strongly about, when I started off in science, if you sent a paper to Nature or Science or the New England Journal of Medicine, the only thing that mattered was the quality of the science. Now, sadly, that is no longer the case. And if you send something to Science or the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the key criteria is whether the New York Times and the Guardian are going to run a story on this on the front page. Now, I'm not saying that psychedelic drugs are a complete no-no, but there has been an enormous amount written in the lay press about studies that have been published in key journals, and the studies are, in my opinion, absolute rubbish. But they've been attractive because they're about LSD or psilocybin or whatever. And the standards have been much lower. If one did a study with a new molecule, did the same standard, it would be back to you within 24 hours from the journal. But because the journal want the New York Times and the Guardian to run articles on it, they'll take it. So I wouldn't totally dismiss the view that psychobiotics and psychedelics could be combined in the long run, but I do think there's a word of caution, definitely.
Thanks much. We'll take one more question.
Sorry, could you explain kefir since you published? What is it? And colours, could you?
Kefir is it's like yogurt, except it's much quicker, actually, I find, to make. So I think probably kefir might have originated in India. It'd be a big one over there. They would drink glass seeds with nearly every meal. A lovely thing the Indian people do as well, if you eat in India, there's always a little bowl of fennel seeds on the table for your digestion. So the fennel seeds are wonderful for, they've got enzymes to help break your food down, and there'll be, of course, your prebiotics and everything in there, and they're great for, you know, digestion and bloating. So the Indians really have had it right for quite a long time. So we talk about all the fermented foods, like it would be just wonderful if we could do all of our pickles and our sauerkraut and get our kids to eat those kind of things, which is why I probably talk more about yogurt and kefir than the other fermented foods, because it's much easier to get those into the diet. So it's like a yogurt, but it's not as thick. So it comes in little grains. It looks like almost cottage cheese, and those grains contain all the lactobacilli bacteria that will ferment the sugars in the milk, or you can make it with coconut water. To be honest, it's much easier with milk. And it's very fast. Within a day and a half, you will have a fairly running yogurt-style drink. You can mix it in with a smoothie with berries. This is why it's great for kids. So you could do a quick smoothie in the morning, pour your kefir, or you could do yogurt as well. They're more familiar with yogurt. It takes a little bit longer for it to ferment and harden. Chuck it in with your berries full of polyphenols for the gut, banana to sweeten it, great prebiotics in a banana, and a spoonful of chia seeds. Kids won't even notice in there, and then you get your omega-3 fats if they won't eat fish. So that's a great gut healthy, kid-friendly starter to your morning.
Thanks, Anneliese. Did you have a question?
Yes, say one wanting to test their microbiome in Cork. I know there's a thing called a GI loss, and it would be very good, but I don't know if there's a place in Cork to test your microbiome.
So testing the microbiome. Well, to be honest, I would caution individuals about having their microbiome tested at this particular point in time. There are a lot of companies out there claiming to test the microbiome, but in fact, at this point in time, we don't even know really what a totally normal microbiome is. Now, if somebody has a pathogen, an abnormal bacteria, for example, it could be salmonella, it could be a lot. There are a lot of different pathogens. Then obviously that shouldn't be in your microbiome. But assuming one doesn't have a pathogen, These companies are giving one a printout and saying you should go on the following diet. There is no science behind that. I mean, it is entirely commercially driven. You know, I think if you take a group of people, let's say with irritable bowel syndrome or a group of people with depression, and you compare them with a group of normal, healthy subjects, you will find differences in populations between the depressed group and the healthy group. But for an individual, for you, for me, or whoever, getting a readout of your microbiome is not really going to be particularly beneficial, and it certainly isn't going to give you advice about what sort of a diet. You know, I think what we've heard today about, let's say, a Mediterranean diet or about various supplements, they're the rules to follow. I think exercise has a profound effect on the microbiome. That's something we haven't spoken about today. I think that is very interesting, how what exercise actually does, what muscles release, what proteins muscle release to actually have a positive impact on the gut microbiota. But I don't really think that getting a printout of one's gut microbiota at this particular point in time is anything other than a waste of money.
Thanks so much, Professor. And I'd like to thank our panel today. If you'd like to take part in the study, it's atlanticaclinicaltrials.com. There's also a stand over and a place if you want to go over there and get some more information. Thank you so much, Professor John.